Trump's national security advisor, General Flynn, is sacked for negotiating with the Russians over sanctions before he'd even taken up the job, and then lying about it to the vice president. Good things had got so bad with Mike Flynn that some US security agencies had even stopped sharing their intelligence with him. Now Trump has had to sack one of his closest acolytes, who he says had broken his trust, while insisting he had not broken the law by negotiating with the Russians before he'd even taken up his job as national security advisor. Worse, the White House was told about it several weeks ago. So what did President Trump know? And when did he know it?
Also tonight, an illustrious corpse in North Korea's Game of Thrones, or just accidental death. Kim Jong-un's older half-brother, erstwhile heir apparent to the throne, dies in mysterious circumstances at Kuala Lumpur airport. Inflation is up again. Economists blame the weak pound, post-Brexit and rising oil prices. Who will consumers blame? And how much more pain can they expect? And PewDiePie, the 27-year-old YouTube star with his own channel and audience of 53 million and 12 million quid in his pocket. It was all going swimmingly until he posted an anti-Semitic video.
Also tonight, with one Trump aide sacked, the focus is back on Steve Bannon.
It's not a migration, it's really an invasion.
We report on his far-right background and look at allegations of controversial activities behind the scenes in the White House.
And what was he like?
Combative, feisty, undersized, but played sports and compensated.
He was a scrapper.
Scrapper, yeah.
He was one of the key first appointments to the Trump administration, but now the president's national security advisor, Mike Flynn, has had to resign over telephone conversations he held with the Russian ambassador before he was appointed to office. He's admitted that he inadvertently failed to give the full details of the conversations when asked about them by Vice President Mike Pence. But the affair has prompted questions of when Donald Trump knew about the calls and their content. Kylie Morris is in Washington. Kylie.
John, we're just hearing from the White House briefing now that this is, they say, about an erosion of trust because Mike Flynn lied to the vice president. That meant President Trump lost confidence in him. I think they're working hard to massage this story away from any suggestion that anyone broke the law in their handling of this, and certainly to try and kind of eliminate, at least take Russia out of the picture. But there are many questions hanging in the air here today. First, though, let's look at the rapid rise and fall of General Mike Flynn.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Only 2 weeks ago, the president's maverick national security advisor stepped up to the podium with an alarming message for Tehran.
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
But in truth, he was already on notice himself. He'd been caught lying about phone calls to the Russian ambassador that at best undermined American policy and at worst broke the law. It was back in December when the US expelled a bunch of Russian diplomats, many of them worked here in the embassy in Washington, in retaliation for Moscow interfering in the presidential election. Now, on that very same day, Mike Flynn got on the phone to his mate, the Russian ambassador. And it's what he said on that day in those phone calls that has ultimately forced his resignation. Had he promised lifting sanctions on Russia when his boss, Donald Trump, took office? No, it was more Christmas greetings and organising meetings, said the White House, and the vice president backed them up.
Did Mike Flynn ever discuss lifting sanctions in any of those conversations?
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions.
Perhaps everyone just wanted to believe Mike Flynn. After all, this was Trump's loyal lieutenant. Yes, he'd had dinner with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and had been fired from his last job for insubordination. But at campaign events like the one where we tried to talk to him...
Can we ask you briefly about Russia?
He was front and centre, a powerful ally for a candidate with no experience.
Yes, that's right. Lock her up.
The new president rewarded him by making Mike Flynn his most senior national security advisor. But this is Washington, and anyone who's read a spy novel knows that American intelligence listens to Russian phone calls. Certainly Mike Flynn should have known that the FBI would be listening. They were. What they heard went straight across the road to the Department of Justice. Late last month, the department, with the FBI's blessing, informed the White House counsel because of concerns Flynn was lying and might have left himself open to blackmail. When that story broke on Friday, the president was quizzed at close quarters on board Air Force One.
The ambassador to Russia, before you were inaugurated, about sanctions, maybe trying to...
I haven't seen that. I'll look at that.
Even late yesterday, the White House professed full confidence in the general.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
But in a matter of hours, that full confidence fizzled away.
The key here is the misleading of the vice president and others, the incomplete information or the inability to completely recall what did or did not happen.
The White House now admits it's known about this for weeks and that senior staff have apparently been angsting over what to do. The thing is, last night they lost their deniability when it came out that the Department of Justice had told them everything. That raised questions. Why were they covering for Mike Flynn? Who else might have been involved? And suddenly, Mike Flynn was history. The president today took to Twitter to try to reset the story, which is really, he wrote about why there are so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington. In the corridors of Congress, senior Republicans saw the story a little differently.
The whole environment is one of dysfunction in the Trump administration as far as national security is concerned.
Michael Flynn resigns.
The president has always promised to make America safe again, but barely a month in power and he's lost trust in the man he trusted to make his most senior national security advisor. General Flynn's departure adds to a sense of chaos undermining the new administration. And even as the White House insists that there was no illegality here, that's what they want people to remember, make no mistake, this is a major setback for President Trump. It's a bad dream. His most trusted advisor, a maverick who was very popular with voters, who represented exactly the kind of new provocative direction that the president wanted to take. But this isn't only about personalities, this is about the Trump administration's relationship to Russia, something the White House really doesn't want back on the agenda. Remember the dossier? Having navigated around that, again, the White House is having to deny the president asked Mike Flynn to make these calls and defend failing to act on this for weeks. Here's what the White House spokesman has just said.
The issue here was that the president got to the point where General Flynn's relationship, misleading the vice president and others, or the possibility that he had forgotten critical details of this important conversation, had created a critical mass and an unsustainable situation. That's why the president decided to ask for his resignation, and he got it.
And who comes next? Well, brace yourself. Among the potential successors, General Petraeus, who the president would have to pardon for leaking state secrets to his mistress before he could be appointed.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Well, with us in the studio here now is Karen von Hippel, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the US State Department, now Director of the foreign policy think tank, the Royal United Services Institute. We're joined from Washington by John Cipher, a former intelligence officer who ran the CIA's Russia program for 3 years, and from Connecticut by the former Navy SEAL Carl Higbie, who is a Trump supporter. Karen von Hippel, if I could start with you. You've been in government. You've had to intersect both with the State Department, probably in dealings with the White House. What is the picture you have of the White House tonight?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems like a house in disarray. Trump, as far as we can tell, and Carl can correct me if he disagrees, but Trump is really used to managing a private company, and running a government is a very different thing. There are issues of morale, you need leadership, you need teamwork, and we're not really seeing any of that right now.
But there seems to be no leadership within the White House below Trump.
Right. So Flynn was a national security advisor, and he's supposed to coordinate the national security team. But even inside the White House, it appears people were finding out what was happening from the news, not even from inside the White House. He doesn't have enough people in yet. And, you know, that's really another challenge, that he's just not been appointing people as quickly. I think the transition team wasn't as prepared as it should have been. And some of this has to do with Trump himself saying, well, I can make all these decisions. You know, I rely on my own judgment.
Well, Carl Higbie, what's your reaction to what's happened today? I mean, you are a Trump supporter, but you also know about intelligence.
Well, yes, and I think you guys made a good point that there is a clear rift and division within the White House itself between holdovers from Obama that are filling positions that will soon be appointed by President Trump, but also the fact that you have loyalists, people who believe in Trump's message, and then people who believe in conventional party politics. And they're both in the cabinet right now, and it's tearing the cabinet apart publicly and giving way to things like this. And I think what needs to happen is, you're right, Trump needs to get his people in place now that believe in his message, that can help execute it faithfully and quickly.
But surely what we learned tonight is that the White House have known for up to 3 weeks that this has been going on, that this whole question of the integrity of the National Security Advisor has been at stake. And it seems that Mr. Trump did nothing about it. I mean, should he have?
Well, I'll let that decision lie in there. I know Mike Flynn. He's always been an honorable, trustworthy, straight shooter to me. I can say what happened here is tragic. I mean, it's not good for the administration. It's not good for the public perception of it. But I will say that this is Trump's chance to get things in order, get the people out. I mean, who are standing in the way of his agenda right now, and start working towards making America better.
John Cipher, you also, I think, have had dealings with Mike Flynn. I mean, what do you make of his fall from grace?
Well, I see this a little bit differently in terms of putting his people in. I think, we don't have a Republican foreign policy or a Democrat foreign policy. We're meant to, with foreign policy, once we get off the water's edge, we're meant to have sort of a bipartisan foreign policy. And I think Mr. Flynn's sort of disdain for the previous administration got him into hot water by his willingness to sort of collude with a foreign power, Russia, while another president and another administration was in power. And that's the problem here, I think.
Well, now, on the question of Russia, where do we go from here? Because one suspects that Mr. Putin may even feel himself somewhat queasy about all this.
Well, my issue here is the Trump administration has not made it clear what is U.S. interest in engaging with Russia. We've heard months and months of how we want to have good relations with Mr. Putin, and there's been all the dossier, Mr. Steele's dossier, there's been Mr. Flynn's reaching out to the Russian ambassador, but it's never been clear to us exactly why. Those of us who have been in foreign policy see a lot of reasons why Mr. Putin would want sanctions relief, and he would want more of a firm hand in Eastern Europe and all those type of things. But the Trump administration has never made it clear what is in the U.S. interest in terms of dealing with Russia.
If we're honest about this, Karen von Hippel, the Western world is without leadership.
Yeah. I mean, the concern I've had for his presidency since the start is he's very erratic and inconsistent. And we've seen just chaos, really, in the few weeks since he's been in power. People on the streets, decisions overturned, changing his mind on a number of really big issues, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's even Israel settlements. And, I worry about America not being the predictable, stable beacon in the world where people know what U.S. foreign policy is. I think that only leads to chaos out there.
But now, Carl Higbie, you worked on Russia for the CIA. You were in the lead on this this matter. I'm sorry, I should actually have been turning to you, Mr. Cipher. You led on relations with Russia. Now, what do you think they will be making of this? And what should we be guarding against here in Europe?
Well, clearly there's a lot of stories about how the Putin administration is really pleased with the comments by Mr. Trump, and we certainly can understand that, and I'm sure they're hoping for a new relationship with the United States. However, they also are probably going through a lot of the same things that we are, is trying to decipher his tweets and his comments, because they are very scattered across, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of competence, at least not yet, in his team. So they're probably trying to figure this out as well. I think now, with the resignation of Mr. Flynn, the Russians are probably quite worried that any fast effort to improve relations with Russia is going to be very difficult. This gives power to both the Democrats, who are going to want to continue to investigate this with good reason, and Republicans who've been on the Hill for a long time and have no interest in cozying up to Russia. So this is going to make, if Mr. Trump had a desire to move fast and improve relations with Russia, I suspect this slows it down.
Carl Higbie, this has been a pretty disastrous 3 weeks for the president. I mean, is this the Trump you were supporting? I mean, is this exactly what you wanted?
Well, the Trump that I'm supporting is not being perpetuated by this, by some of the people that he's dealing with in the administration. I think the American media also has done a real disservice to the potential relationship with Russia in the sense that they've essentially demonized any type of contact, any type of working with them or trying to get along with them as negative. And I remember President Obama during the Mitt Romney election was praised for saying that Mitt Romney, the Cold War called, they want their policy back. And when he wanted to do the Russian reset and things like that. So I think the mainstream media here in America has really done a disservice to any potential relationship with Russia. And it's not conducive
Mr.
to
Higbee,
success.
can I just interrupt you right there? Because, I mean, if it weren't for the Washington Post, we probably wouldn't know 3/3 of this.
Well, the issue here is there are substantial leaks within the administration right now, and that comes from the holdovers from Obama. A lot of people who don't agree with Trump's policies. I believe in Trump. I know him. I've met him. I know his family. He is trying to do this for America. He didn't have to do this. He's a billionaire, could have retired on a beach, but he did this because he loves the United States.
Let me just put those points to Karen von Hippel. You were shaking your head.
Well, I disagree about the holdovers from Obama. Almost everyone I know who worked for Obama was told unceremoniously to get out the door. Some people were even on airplane trips going to different countries for work when they were told to pack up their bags. So it's really an issue of you have some people that many of us are concerned about, like Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn is another one, who are pitted against some pretty seasoned, able cabinet members, and that's really the concern. Is you have very extremes in that White House right now.
Karen von Hippel, thank you very much. And John Cipher in Washington, thank you very much. And in Connecticut, thank you very much, Carl Higbee. Matt.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Now, the government has rejected a petition calling for Donald Trump's state visit here. His invitation to be withdrawn. Nearly 2 million people signed it, but ministers say that although they recognize the strong views expressed, they are looking forward to welcoming the president. A counter-petition also attracted more than 300,000 signatures. Both will be debated by the House of Commons later this month.
And later in the programme, we'll be focusing on another of Donald Trump's closest aides, Steve Bannon. Is the president's chief strategist with a controversial place on the National Security Council. But just how much influence does he really wield? And how does he use it?
He is a frightening, no. He is a terrifying man.
Now, one of the early security issues for the Trump administration is the increasingly troubling behavior of North Korea's Kim Jong-un. He had his uncle and mentor executed with anti-aircraft fire for allegedly plotting against him. Has North Korea's bad boy autocrat now done the same to his older half-brother? Kim Jong-nam had long lived in exile. Today, he died in mysterious circumstances trying to catch a plane in the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur. According to one report, he was poisoned by 2 female agents. Here's Kieran Jenkins.
This is the man who might have been North Korean leader, whose half-brother got the job instead and may now have had him killed. Kim Jong-nam was often on the move, rare sightings, usually at airports, where for a while he had to deny ambitions to succeed his father.
Are you interested in?
No, I told you last time. Okay. I'm not interested.
Okay, so do you sometimes talk to your father about your future, country's future?
So who spied him yesterday at Kuala Lumpur International? One South Korean TV channel makes the extraordinary claim he was killed here by female North Korean agents brandishing a poisoned needle. Malaysian authorities say he died on the way to hospital. No word about potential assailants. Kim Jong-nam was the eldest son of divine leader Kim Jong-il. You won't see family photos with Kim Jong-un. The brothers reportedly have never met. Were it not for this place, Kim Jong-nam might even be the brother in charge. In 2001, he said he was going to Tokyo Disneyland. The Japanese officials found him travelling on a fake Dominican passport. After that, he fell out of favour. But in the week North Korea showed off its latest missile launch, Why would the supreme leader want his elder sibling dead? He's already had his uncle executed, a powerful regime figure. The same can't be said of Kim Jong-nam. Unverified reports paint him as something of a critic. Others saw an extrovert who hung out in Macau, Las Vegas of Asia.
I never defected from North Korea. No, I'm still living in North Korea, and just like I'm traveling in Macau, in China.
Was he killed? Was it his brother? Kim Jong-un may have proved again to be not just a ruthless, but a paranoid leader.
Now, here in Britain, there are new questions this evening over the future of the UK's planned nuclear power programme, after Toshiba reported multi-million-pound losses, triggering the resignation of its chairman. The company has a controlling share in a firm slated to build a new nuclear reactor in Cumbria. And while it says it is still committed to the project, there are continued concerns about the deal. Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has this.
Nugen, 60% owned by Toshiba, it could be the site of Britain's largest nuclear power station. But today, a corporate earthquake on the other side of the world made the future of the project in Moorside, Cumbria, look rather shaky. For Toshiba, it was a moment to face the press. But instead of transparency, the chairman fell on his sword. Amidst the share price crash and a $6.3 billion write-down, it also conceded it would have to scale back its overseas nuclear business.
Regarding the UK, we are still looking into this with the condition that we don't take responsibility over construction work. And like before, we will continue to sell our stakes if anyone wishes to invest into it.
Leaving the UK's Moorside hanging in the balance.
Well, Toshiba's basically bust, and it's been broken, in fact, by a nuclear project. So the idea that it won't want to get rid of Moorside for whatever value it can realise, it seems to me very, very unlikely. They will try to sell it. I'm not sure they'll find a buyer. What you've got a real risk of here is pouring good money after bad, because the headlines would be so awful if you just said, all right, we're giving up.
While the government and Nugen insisted Moorside was still on track, industry insiders said Toshiba's language on construction risk showed if there was no new investor, they'd want the British taxpayer to underwrite the risk. Trade unions called on the government today to save the project, which is billed as providing 8% of the UK's electricity needs.
This is a new development, potentially post-Brexit, employing 20,000 British workers, a key part of indirect and supply chain in West Cumbria, so it would be devastating if that didn't go ahead.
Britain currently has 8 operating nuclear power stations, providing around a fifth of the country's electricity, but half are due to be decommissioned within 6 years, and all by 2035. In September, the government gave the go-ahead to Hinkley C, which will be built by a French-Chinese consortium. Along with Moorside, new reactors are also planned for Sizewell, Wilfer and Oldbury. Today was a double whammy for Britain's nuclear ambitions, with news of further financial strife at French EDF, the company building Hinkley Point C. Together with Toshiba, EDF's fate is at the heart of Britain's energy strategy, a policy that has put foreign companies in charge of keeping on Britain's lights. What happens to overseas balance sheets could have a real impact on the ground here.
The UKIP leader Paul Nuttall has admitted that a claim on his website that he had lost close personal friends at the Hillsborough disaster was wrong. When questioned today about the blog written under his name several years ago, he told Radio City Talk that he'd lost people he knew through football at the Hillsborough tragedy, but not a close personal friend. Mr. Nuttall also vigorously defended himself against accusations that his claim that he was at the match was untrue.
You say you lost a close personal friend. That's on your website.
I haven't lost a close personal friend. I've lost someone who I know, but I don't know who's written.
January 9th, 2012, on your own site.
That is.
Lost close personal friends. It's on your website.
Well, that's not from me. I'm sorry.
It's on your own website, Paul.
Well, that is absolutely. No, I'm sorry. I haven't
took
lost
it last
anyone
night from the website.
I haven't lost anyone who was a close personal friend. There was people who I knew through football and things like that.
Well, now, back to Washington. And while we've been on air, the US Office of Government Ethics has asked the White House to investigate comments made by the president's counselor, Kellyanne Conway, apparently promoting the business interests of Ivanka Trump. And tonight, we're looking at the role of another of Trump's top team. Steve Bannon is the president's chief strategist, with a regular seat on the powerful National Security Council. But his background as executive chair of the far-right Breitbart News website has made him a controversial appointment. And some reports of his activities behind the scenes in the White House are increasing concerns. Inigo Gilmore has been finding out more.
The protests are loud and growing louder against the new arrivals in the Oval Office. Their target, not just Donald Trump.
Everyone knows what that means, right?
But his powerful chief strategist, Steve Bannon.
The unthinkable became thinkable.
The man who helped orchestrate Donald Trump's once unthinkable election victory made apocalyptic propaganda films like this one, Generation Zero.
Nobody is accounting for what they're spending.
In the film, Mr. Bannon says the baby boomers of the 60s became an uncaring ruling elite responsible for economic disaster. This was a recurring and provocative theme when he ran Breitbart, the right-wing website accused of stirring racial hatred in the United States.
A president of the United States should not have a racist at his side.
Alarm from the right as well as the left.
He's a nightmare.
The #1 spot in this week's edition of Who's the Real President goes to...
Such is his power and influence in the White House. He's already been portrayed as Trump's puppet master.
Steve Bannon! Yay!
You don't get between Steve and his objective.
Mr. Bannon's dark worldview, as outlined in his films and media appearances, speaks of a dystopian America, battling multiple enemies, from its own corrupt elites to radical Islam.
I believe strongly is a crisis both of our church, a crisis of our faith, a crisis of the West, and a crisis of capitalism. We're at the very beginning stages of a very brutal and bloody conflict.
He's trying to encourage chaos.
So who is Steve Bannon? And is it his vision that's shaping the Trump administration and its more controversial policies?
You can't handle the truth.
At the other side of this crisis.
So what is his truth?
We had the Revolution, we had the Civil War, we had the Great Depression of World War II. This is the great fourth turning in American history. And
Steve Bannon believes America is at an historical turning point, and he sees the corrupt political and business elites as an enemy to be defeated.
Don't believe the establishment. Do not believe the permanent political class. We are on the right side of history. This is going to be a very nasty, long, protracted fight.
His enemies are both at home and abroad. The Christian West, as he sees it, under threat.
And it is a crisis both of capitalism, but really of the underpinnings of the Judeo-Christian West in our beliefs.
To be brutally frank, I mean, Christianity is dying in Europe and Islam's on the rise.
Stand with our beliefs, but to fight for our beliefs against this new barbarity that's starting. We're now, I believe, at the beginning stages of a global war against Islamic fascism.
He also has a problem with the massive influx of migrants, including many Muslims, to Europe.
It's not a migration, it's really an invasion.
These are not people with thousands of years of understanding democracy in their DNA coming up here.
To try to understand how Steve Bannon came to hold these views, we traveled first to his hometown. Mr. Bannon grew up in a working-class family in this neighborhood of Richmond, Virginia, one of 5 children in a close-knit community where Christian faith was central to daily life. As an Irish Catholic, his Judeo-Christian worldview was initially shaped during his formative years at this Benedictine school, run almost like a military academy.
Orthodox Catholic training from the Benedictines that I think's influenced Steve.
Pat McSweeney grew up close to the Bannon family and went to the same school.
And what was he like?
Combative, feisty, undersized, but played sports and compensated through energy and determination for what he lacked physically.
He was a scrapper.
Scrapper, yeah. He had to be held back. You didn't have to push him into conflict. He was there to find it, and he never backed down.
Many of Bannon's historical American heroes were assertive, revolutionary figures who came from Virginia, including founding fathers George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, as well as Patrick Henry, who proclaimed here in Richmond, "Give me liberty or give me death."
You've got the ideas and the documents of the Revolution of Independence and Bill of Rights.
Larry Nordvig, a former Virginia Tea Party director, has worked with Mr. Bannon and says the president's key advisor sees himself at the vanguard of historical change.
When Donald Trump talks about making America great again, and Steve Bannon as well, this is the kind of figures they're talking about.
I would say Steve Bannon very much has this sense that we've been handed down this gift and we have to preserve it and throw it forward to the next generation.
A big reader of military history, sees himself as perpetually involved in these grand civilizational struggles. And everything with Bannon is very, very kind of mega and big and is going to lead to a clash.
So he's kind of on a constant war footing, as it were.
Absolutely. Constant war footing, yes.
Josh Green first met Steve Bannon in 2011 and wrote a profile on him. At the time, the man who was to become Trump's campaign manager was working on a promotional film about the right-wing firebrand Sarah Palin, hoping she would run for president.
Everybody in politics back then thought that Palin was going to run for president in 2012. So Bannon had kind of insinuated himself into her inner circle and was kind of a Palin whisperer slash advisor slash documentary filmmaker.
It wasn't something that the machine prepared the way for.
Although Palin didn't run in the end, in many ways his efforts became a stepping stone to his successful Trump campaign. His tactics to promote ideological allies combined with a ferocious media onslaught.
So that's you there?
There's me giving a nice fiery speech that day, and you can see there's Steve Bannon in the background clapping there.
Which is often, you often see him like that with Trump, don't you? You see Trump and then he's sort of lurking in the background. So pulling the strings maybe.
I don't know if I like that parallel, but afterward Steve wanted to meet me, and he actually asked if I would consider running for Congress based on the speech that he just heard. He has used Breitbart effectively to whip up the grassroots. I know the Tea Party, he got their tempers up and got them active.
Under Steve Bannon, Breitbart ran highly provocative articles which appealed to the alt-right, a rebrand of the far-right movement. It includes white nationalists, many of whom publicly supported Trump's presidential campaign. White nationalists share many sentiments with notorious white supremacists. The articles on Breitbart spoke of an us and them America. The website was also accused of pursuing an anti-Muslim agenda. Many women, too, were outraged by some of the articles, with headlines like, "Birth control makes women unattractive and crazy."
He said that all the racism and what have you would wash out. That was his phrase, that eventually they would sort of see the light and drop those objectionable views. But what was important to Bannon is that they were on his side when it came to tearing down members of the establishment.
So he welcomed white supremacy as part of his empowerment thing, as a power struggle.
I don't know that he welcomed it, but he certainly didn't show any sign that he was particularly troubled by it.
With the campaign they ran and the election of Trump, they've really opened the door for white nationalists to feel empowered. And it does seem like all the advice that he's been giving both to Trump in the campaign of not being a bridge builder, but of doubling down on increasing people's fear and hatred and marginalizing others.
In Donald Trump, Bannon finally found his vessel, somebody who shared his populist ideas, but who also had the kind of personal force to go out on the campaign trail and convince voters and steamroll critics that Palin and Bachmann and people of their ilk never could.
And steamroll he has done, with the president's chief strategist, insiders say, right in the driver's seat. A flurry of executive orders, including an entry ban to the United States for people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries, have caused outrage.
No hate, no fear.
Refugees are welcome here.
It was Mr. Bannon who apparently insisted that American green card holders be included in the ban, with critics saying he simply has a problem with Muslims. But in a recent interview, Mr. Bannon rejected accusations that he's a racist. "I'm not a white nationalist. I'm a nationalist. I'm an economic nationalist," he said. But such denials have done little to quieten his many opponents who are alarmed by his involvement in drafting executive orders. There's also been uproar over a White House announcement that he will have a seat on the National Security Council, an unprecedented move for a presidential advisor.
He does not have an experience in government. He does not have experience in national security. And so to put someone who has his very clear track record as a white nationalist, which is essentially a white supremacist, in the center of national security for the country is quite troubling.
Steve Bannon.
Even the conservative television host Glenn Beck, once a darling of the Tea Party, is troubled by Bannon's power and influence.
Breitbart as a platform for the alt-right. He is on record saying that. He's on record defining the alt-right. He knows what it is. He is a guy who he wants to tear this system down and replace it with a new system. He is a frightening, he is a terrifying man.
He has this image of being a very incendiary person.
Well, of course he does. But that's tempered with the Bannon I know, who's really a far more subtle person than his manner would suggest. I think he likes that persona, but he's a very thoughtful person.
Send in Steve Bannon.
In Saturday Night Live, he's cast as the all-powerful Grim Reaper.
Hello, Donald. I have arrived. Hi, Steve. You look rested. Thank you.
In a deeply divided United States, Steve Bannon is seen either as the man who will help save America or destroy it.
Can I have my desk back? Yes, of course, Mr. President. I'll go sit at my desk.
One thing both sides do agree on, he will have a powerful, pivotal role in the fate of the Trump White House.
Inigo Gilmore reporting that. Inflation has reached a 2.5-year high as surging oil prices and the fall in the value of the pound after Brexit combined to push prices higher. The Consumer Price Index jumped 1.8% in January, the highest figure since June 2014. And there's more inflation to come, as our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, now reports.
This haulage firm in Ashford in Kent is almost completely dependent on one thing to do its business: petrol. So when the price of oil jumps more than 80% in a year, they're going to feel it.
We had another monthly snapshot of inflation today, and the numbers do not look good. Businesses like these are being hit by price increases not seen in years. And there's a double whammy effect. Not only is the price of oil going through the roof, but thanks to the fall in the value of sterling post-Brexit, the oil is that much more expensive to import.
There are 12 lorries on site delivering everything from steel girders to plant pots across the UK. But the fuel bill to fill up the fleet has risen to £9,000 a week, the majority of which he passes on to his customers.
The cost in running vehicles is going up and up and up. And yeah, so someone's got to pay for it.
Can you continue, do you think, to pass those costs on, or do you not have to sort of stomach some of them yourself?
No, there's no more to stomach. It has to be passed on. You know, we're at a point now where that's what we need to run this company, and it's got to stay at that level.
And do you think your customers will take that?
I think they're fair. They would. Yeah, they will, yeah.
We went to see one of Kevin's customers just 5 minutes down the road. Apter Pottery sells plant pots of all shapes and sizes to garden centres in the UK. So are they happy they're having Kevin's fuel costs to deliver their pots passed on to them?
I think happy would be an exaggeration. We recognise the economic reality, and we will certainly work with our suppliers, but we are not going to be absorbing the full impact of the fuel increase. It's not possible.
But petrol is only half the problem. Apter imports all its pots, mostly from the Far East, and pays in dollars. So the plummeting pound has taken its toll.
If the cost price has increased by 20%, that has to be reflected in the selling price. That's a commercial reality, and if unfortunately it means that we sell a few less of our pots, then I'm afraid that is the situation we'll have to work with.
People are saying, aren't they, politicians, there's no problem, there's no inflation, the economy's not slowing, that post-Brexit we're all fine.
No, but that's because inflation through imported goods is delayed, and as much as 12 months. And I've no doubt at all that we are yet to see the major impact. So talking about it now, that it hasn't affected things, is entirely premature.
All of which means the price of these pots is set to go up. And it's that prospect of inflation hitting us, the consumer, that has the Bank of England worried. Because if they raise interest rates to bring inflation back down, then that will hit our mortgages and our credit cards. And that could make things worse.
So for now, the only option seems to be to sit tight, allow prices to rise and hope the consumer simply doesn't stop spending. A gamble that may not pay off.
So are today's figures a sign that inflation levels could set for a steep rise, for a welcome relief for exporters seeking to take advantage of new opportunities post-Brexit? With me now is a Conservative MP and Leave campaigner Kwasi Kwarteng and the economist Vicky Pryce. Kwasi Kwarteng, let me start with you. Hello. So as you told us on this programme many times, the doomsayers after Brexit got it wrong. Things were actually rather positive. But when it comes to inflation, they might have had a point.
I think inflation is a legitimate thing to raise. But if you look at the round, you're just focusing on one economic figure. Just today, the EU have revised up their figure for UK growth, just as the Bank of England revised up their figures for UK growth.
But inflation does cut into people's spending, doesn't it?
No, it does. I mean, I fully accept that the fall in the pound does lead to potential inflationary outcome. But if you take what was said in the round, where we were meant to find a recession, we were meant to see 500,000 jobs that were lost, we were meant to see house prices collapse 20%. All of that hasn't happened, thankfully. And I think you've got to take the whole picture, the economic picture, as 100% whole, not just look at a tiny slice of it.
And wages are also part of that picture. Will wages rise in line with inflation?
I suspect
no
they
signs so far.
Well, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I think the interesting thing is that the GDP figures that you will know and Vicky knows have all been revised up, every single one of them. And that's the big take-home. And we were told that this was a self-made recession. If the British people had the temerity to vote to leave the EU, there would be an immediate recession. And when people say, oh, we haven't left the EU yet, the Brexit budget was not for 2019. That was for last year. And the predictions were for recession in 2016.
Let's turn to Vicky Pryce. Vicky, I'm not sure if you're one of the doomsayers or not, but are you as relaxed about the economic future as Kwasi Kwarteng is?
I'm afraid I'm not, because, of course, we're not there yet. We haven't had Brexit. But, of course, the uncertainty is now increasing because we're going to be entering this 2-year period of negotiations, and who knows where we'll end up when those are concluded. But, of course, what's going on right now is that the fall in the pound, in a way, it's obviously helped manufacturing exports. There's no doubt about that. So we were
but that's only a small part of the economy, isn't
I'm
it?
afraid it's a very small part of the economy. Even if manufacturing output rises by, let's say, 10% this year, it's not going to make a huge difference to the economy as a whole. What really has sustained GDP has been spending by the consumers. And the reason why they've done that is because they've been encouraged by the Bank of England cutting interest rates, by, again, the governor putting huge amounts of liquidity into the system to go out and borrow and spend. And the moment this now looks like being a bit more expensive and their wages are not in fact rising, they're already reining back. If you look at some of the data, retail sales fell in December, for example, and the consumer has already slowed down in terms of the amount that it borrows every month.
This is a problem, isn't it, Kwasi Kwarteng? And I mean, in a sense...
But hang on, I mean,
the pound has sort of become the official opposition to the government and Brexit. Every time Theresa May says something that the markets don't like, the pound has a very volatile reaction. And that is something that's bad for consumers because of inflation, also bad for business.
I think I would be very hesitant to be a currency trader, and that's not what I do. But it was very interesting that Vicky mentioned the cut in interest rates. A lot of people, certainly on my side, felt that the cut in interest rates that Mark Carney put forward last year, towards the end of last year, to 0.25%, was perhaps a bit premature. And you can't, on the one hand, say that complain about inflation and then not sort of attribute it in some part to this very low interest rate. I mean, this is the lowest interest rate in 300 years.
But
and it may well be the case that he has to put it back up to 0.5%, which was the original interest rate until he cut it.
But there will be more pain to come as the real negotiations over Article 50 with the EU start, won't there?
I don't believe that. I think there's a lot of doom-mongering still, a lot of pessimism. We saw an awful lot of it, which I've referred to 6 months ago, before the actual vote. And very much the same people who said we were all going to go to hell in a handcart in 2016 are now saying essentially the same thing.
Okay.
The negotiations will be prolonged, it'll be difficult, we won't get any good deals, it'll be miserable.
Okay.
And I don't believe it.
But that is exactly what might happen. I talked to Emmanuel Macron, who might be the next French president, yesterday, and he said it will be tough for Britain.
Well, it will be tough, but if we're looking at what may be happening between now and then, there is no doubt that prices are going to have a serious effect on people's consumers' intentions and spending intentions. And that's going to be a serious problem looking ahead. So how the economy is doing by the time we conclude these negotiations, nobody knows, because the uncertainty is also encouraging people to rethink investment decisions. We've seen those slowing down very significantly. The question is whether they pick up again. And on the spending side too, the interesting thing is that suppliers, for the moment, have not been able to pass costs on to the consumer. Because, in fact, the consumers become terribly careful about what they spend. And that's a serious issue about whether they can survive.
Got to leave it there. Vicky Price, Quasi Quoting, thanks very much. John.
YouTube has downgraded its biggest star after he posted videos with anti-Semitic comments. Known online as PewDiePie, 27-year-old Felix Schellberg is thought to have made more than £10 million last year from his YouTube channel, which has over 53 million subscribers. He's also been dropped by the film giant Disney, who said he'd gone too far. Schellberg said he was only trying to show how crazy the modern world is and didn't mean to offend. And a warning, there is offensive language in Porrick O'Brien's report.
A story of our incongruous times. The cast, pay-per-performance internet entrepreneurs in India. Brash millionaire YouTuber in Brighton.
You can have whatever opinion you want. People can still argue against you.
Internet giant Disney and Google and YouTube.
Professional YouTuber, everyone. I've been doing YouTube for 6 years. I know what.
Felix Schellberg is a 27-year-old Swede who works out of Brighton. The bedsit bellicosity belies a giant media company. He has 53 million subscribers to his YouTube channel. Dubbed the king of YouTube, he earned a reported $14.5 million last year.
I'm going back in time, guys.
He had deals with Disney and YouTube. His style, brash, outrageous, boundary bending. But on January the 11th, he pushed the boundary right over the edge of a cliff.
We'll paint your message on my body and dance in the jungle.
The Fiverr funny guys in India tailor performances with messages and post them online for a $5.
Death to... Please, deliver.
Schellberg paid up. He sent offensive anti-Semitic text.
I paid for this.
And it was duly performed.
I like the editing.
Subscribe to Keemstar.
I am sorry. I didn't think they would actually do it. I feel partially responsible, but I didn't think they would actually do it.
Despite the apology, though, the video was published. A month on, after a Wall Street Journal report, Maker Studios, the division of Disney that are his business partners, severed ties with the YouTuber, saying the video was inappropriate and he'd gone too far. Then, earlier today, Google, who own YouTube, decided to remove his channel from their service, Google Preferred.
My kind apologize to the Jewish people.
The Fiverr funny guys put their clothes back on, apologized and said they hadn't understood what the message meant. But what of the man himself?
Context matters.
He didn't respond to our request for interview today, but in a video recently, acknowledged the offence caused and spoke about the difference between political comment and provocative comedy.
It's 2017 now. We're gonna have to start separating what is a joke and what is actually problematic, or what actually fulfills the label or whatever you're calling it.
Which is fair enough, except for the fact that interacting with his audience's own video online is part of his USP, and many of them are children.
Okay, you're starting to make me angry.
Oh, it zooms in.
Come on.
At the heart of this story, then, how the new media giants like Google and Disney juggle corporate responsibility and content cash cows.
Warwick O'Brien on PewDiePie.
Now, after the break, we talk to the German fine art photographer Wolfgang Tillmans on his observations on a troubled world. The Turner Prize-winning artist Wolfgang Tillmans takes over 14 rooms of the Tate Modern in London this week with a vast multimedia retrospective. The German photographer uses his digital camera as well as music and press cuttings to explore the politics of a violent, divided and fragile world. Krishnan went to see him.
The lusty, decadent delights of imperial Pompeii. Notifying ground crews.
This period of your work begins with the seismic events of the Iraq War.
It was this shock with our politicians that millions of people could see that something wrong is happening and that you're powerless. And then, of course, the war itself and its disastrous after effects, including the European refugee crisis, are now with us. And so the now, as we experience it, has started in 2003 for me. And of course now we are into a new now, I guess, since last year.
Of populism?
Of populism, yes. What we are experiencing right now is really the biggest thing I've experienced in my life. You know, I really think what I've enjoyed in the last 25 years is under full-on attack from within our societies, from Russia, from across the Atlantic, from Islamism. This European free life, liberal life, is under full-on attack.
Is that something you realised at the time of the Brexit referendum, or is it something you've come to afterwards?
That was very clear to me that this is actually at stake. The enemies of the EU are actually the enemies of the values the EU stands for, and that is cooperation, non-nationalism, non-xenophobia, it is human rights. So to stigmatize the EU as the enemy is crazy. And of course, the disenfranchised people in England's north, they will not be helped by Brexit.
But for the other side, it's easy for them to dismiss you as the epitome of the liberal elite.
It's a crazy accusation because you call an elite somebody who is informed and has a different opinion to yours.
They would say that you call them populist because you disagree with them.
Yes. I will continue to campaign, which I have never done before, but I think this is a crucial moment where goalposts are completely shifting.
Artistically, this also saw you move from a film camera to digital.
There's more information in these pictures than you can see with your eye when you are in front of the real subject matter. That poses really deep questions about the meaning of information and what can we do with this depth of information. And in that way, I find they are reflective of the times we're in as a whole. I mean, everybody has this infinite amount of information and can zoom into, you know, a Google map. And the exhibition as a whole is trying to negotiate and make peace with this depth of information around us. This seascape is called the state we're in. It alludes to the political climate we're in because it shows a sea so tense with so many different waves, smaller waves, almost all battling each other and about to erupt. When you look at it sideways, it becomes strangely three-dimensional. And this is something you can only see in a gallery in a museum when you're standing here.
Reliable computer technology. And people are lifeline will
The German photographer Wolfgang Tillmans.
That's it. That's Channel 4 News. Have a great evening.
Goodbye.